the Trump administration proposing changes to the Endangered Species Act. A proposed rule change to the Endangered Species Act could redefine, the word harm, potentially stripping protections for habitat destruction.
The word harm is so important because we understand it in environmental law as something that happens even if it's as a proxy or a bypass, whereas this change would mean only intentional physical damage.
A United States issue that's going to leak into the world. This is a Trump administration fight that's happening here. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-host Victoria Cornelio and myself, Jensen Cummings. Today we're talking here's what's happening right now. The Trump administration proposing changes to the Endangered Species Act. A proposed rule change to the Endangered Species Act could redefine the word harm, potentially stripping protections for habitat destruction. Additionally, a budget proposal outlined dramatic cuts to agencies like the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, as well as NASA Earth Science. All right, that kind of lays it out a little bit. This is falling under Trump administration's goal of attacking fraud, waste, and abuse, as they have stated. Sometimes this looks like it's ideological. We're going to kind of talk about some of the facts of this case a little bit. So Victoria, start us off. The Endangered Species Act. Tell us a little bit about it. What's the history of it and kind of what's being proposed here?
Well, it's important to know that it was passed in 1973. So it basically requires the government to protect against harm or endangered species and their habitats being harmed. And the word harm is so important because we understand it in environmental law as something that happens even if it's as a proxy or a bypass, whereas this change would mean only intentional physical damage. So say a good example is say that a project has been approved in a certain area, but no one accounted for the fact that it was going to pollute the river. During the harm definition that we have now, you can prosecute that. If we change that, it means that only if the project intentionally meant to harm the river or knew that that was going to happen, then they can be liable. If they didn't know and they can just plead, "Oh, we didn't know," then that happens to them.
Yeah, intent's important there when you're talking about the legality of
Yeah,
it.
and then the ESA is so important as well because it has protected over 1,600,000 species since it was passed, including the bald eagle, the gray wolf, humpback whale, all these animals that we see as super emblematic and important. 99% of listed species have avoided extinction because of this act. So wanting to just pull it is a bit weird, especially harm. A lot of these species have been protected because the implication that harm can happen unbeknownst to us is really important because as new science comes in and as new research comes in, then we learn of new ways that we are harming the environment unknowingly.
Yeah, especially you mentioned the bald eagle. I thought for sure that the MAGA crowd would not want to see the bald eagle, the symbol of America, put in harm's way in any way, shape, or
Right.
form. So that's a little surprising to me, actually.
Yeah, you would think.
Okay, the rule itself. Talk about some of what potentially can happen because of these potential kind of rule changes, these proposed rule changes, and then we'll talk a little bit about budget.
Well, it mostly just means that developers, extractive industries, polluters in general, they're just going to face fewer restrictions, which some would argue they already face quite lax restrictions as it is. So even opening that pool wider seems a bit counterproductive. And it just means that when operating near endangered species, if their actions aren't seen as direct harm, then they can't be prosecuted, they can't be held liable.
And harm, like go into that a little bit. So the developers, extractive industries, as far as harm goes, here's something I think about this in the context of like carbon credits, where you can basically buy the opportunity. We've talked about this before, to continue to pollute as long as somebody else is not polluting, and you buy their good works that then offset your impacts, right? So this has happened with habitats quite a bit as well, where a developer goes in and destroys a habitat, but they build another habitat somewhere else. Does that actually work for these animals? Can they just pick up and move and then be fine?
Yeah, so basically what it means is that developers, extractive industries, polluters, they can all face fewer restrictions when operating near endangered species if their actions aren't seen as direct harm. And when we talk about direct harm, is that knowingly something is happening and we're just choosing to ignore it, or we're going ahead knowing this thing's going to happen. Whereas retroactively, a lot of projects have been made, and you can check out in the blog post for some examples of this, of projects that have been greenlit, and then either new research or new things start happening in the environment, and we notice, oh, actually this project that was greenlit 5 years ago is causing not direct harm, but it is still harm, right? And the restrictions are already lax as it is, so making them even more chill is a bit counterproductive to what the whole mission and the whole justification for doing this is, I would say.
Understood. All right, so budget proposals, some of the key points here. Let me just read these off for you. So we're talking about cutting NOAA's, the National Ocean Service, by 50%, cutting in half right there. Eliminate Sea Grant climate research and education. Move the National Marine Fisheries Service under the Department of the Interior. Slash the EPA staffing to 1980s levels. We're going back in time here. And then reducing NASA's Earth science programs. So again, I mentioned this at the top end of this, that it's about government overreach. It's about eliminating efficiencies and the fight for fraud, waste, and abuse. These are the stated reasons for something like this. Again, critics are on the other side. These are not about efficiency cuts. These are ideology. This is about targeting climate science, environmental protections, agencies with oversight to allow, again, a completely different ideological stance on the climate, on endangered species to kind of take hold here. So from these levels of the budget cuts, some of these rule changes, Victoria, let's zoom out a little bit as far as what are the wider implications here? What are the impacts that we think that this might have on obviously the United States role, but potentially even its role as an international player on the global stage?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty scary. And if that's not clear yet, just think about all these very important organizations and departments of the United States getting cut. It will limit the US's ability to monitor climate change, to enforce environmental regulations, protect endangered species, but bigger than that, respond to extreme weather events, which we know are coming, and we've seen them come already as global warming begins and continues to spike. Globally, the US stepping back sends a signal to other nations, potentially weakening international commitments to biodiversity and climate action. So it's not just something that at home it's going to be an issue, but a signal is being sent that environment is not really top of mind. And a lot of environmental activists have worked to make climate change, one, not as a political issue as such, but more as a national agenda issue that we need to tackle no matter which way you come at it from whatever side of the spectrum you're in. But also, it's something that affects
Mm-hmm.
absolutely everybody. It doesn't really matter who you are. So these organizations are really important for keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening, what can be done, what kind of protections do we need. And endangered species isn't just something that is like, oh, this really cute animal. It's necessary for the balance of the ecosystem. If the ecosystem is out of balance, things start getting out of
Right.
balance, and then everything is out of balance. You can see a lot of research on, for example, why bees and mosquitoes are so important to the balance, right? They're such a small thing, but they're really
100%.
important. So rolling these things,
We start losing pollinators, we start losing
right.
food.
Yeah. And rolling all these things back, even just like rolling back education on these things, so you don't want people to know what's happening. You don't want people to be equipped to deal with it. It's just
Yeah.
a lot.
Victoria, can you zoom out even a little bit and give us some personal perspective or some of your perspective from a global position, right? Because this is very much a United States issue that's going to leak into the world. This is a Trump administration fight that's happening here. From you, coming from the Dominican Republic, you're in the UK now. What is the world viewing when they see something like this happen within the United States, within the Trump administration. Can you give us some of that perspective?
I mean, I'm going to pull from what happened when Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement. And
Mm-hmm.
what that allowed was for the UK and the EU to take some leadership in climate action, climate initiatives, and policies. So I would like to think that something similar is happening here. I think, at least here in my side of the world, in the UK and the EU, the US isn't seen as a key player in climate change. They are very much a country that should lower their emissions, and they do have a severe impact on our CO2 levels and global warming stakes and things like that. But in terms of action and solutions, I don't think they are seen as favorably as they used to be. However, coming from a country like Dominican Republic, which has a lot of ties to the US and a lot of political, let's say, dependency on it, as a lot of Latin American countries do, there is something to be said that the decisions made in Washington do affect how we personally might view something like climate change that isn't a political issue, quote unquote, but it's more of a social, economic issue of disaster risk management and that sort of thing. And one of the reasons that if we move climate change away from the national agenda is that suddenly it's not as important. Voters aren't voting depending on climate action and climate policies. Voters aren't clued in on what's happening or what's being done. Funding isn't available for national programs and research. So, taking it away from the spotlight that it used to have is really important. And what worries me is that this move of defunding, but also wanting to overhaul things that have been accepted since Nixon, is a bit like, why are we going backwards on something that we seem to have some understanding on, you know?
Mm-hmm. Especially when you see those like 1980s levels or cutting these things down back to before this ideological shift that's happening right now, I think is clearly and potentially problematic. All right, a lot more to come, I think, on this topic. We will stay aware of what's happening in this space. Potentially some updates coming. This is a new format for us with the here's what's happening right now, as we want to be understanding the current affairs, some of the breaking news. So look out for these shorter episodes coming up in the future, as well as always. Check out tangeliclife.org. The accompanying blog post to this episode will have a lot of information and resources so that you can understand more of what's happening in this space as these potential rule changes, budget cuts, this reformation happens under the Trump administration. You'll see some stuff from Earthjustice, which has a response to this ruling. There's some legal action happening as well. IFAW is another organization, the Wildlife Conservancy Society, and you'll see some of what's happening around U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services as well on the blog post. So definitely check that out. For Victoria and I, appreciate you all.
Thank you.